there's a lot of opportunity within generative AI, but there's a whole host of compliance regulatory issues as well as risks and concerns. And how do organizations begin to approach it? We like to break it out into 4 different areas. The first one being legal and regulatory compliance requirements, promulgated initially by the EU, but now many states and California is looking at a number of new ones worldwide. And there's a lot of rules how you can use generative AI. Most of them have to do around, use of personal information or decisions about individuals, but they're not listed to that. But then we have, and we think one of the mistakes organizations sometimes make is they just focus on the legal and regulatory requirements. Other areas that organizations need to look at is sort of data provenance. If we're using generative AI, how can we make sure that we have rights to the IP and we don't produce something with generative AI which violates somebody else's IP? And the corollary to that is, how do we make sure that we don't inadvertently disclose our own sensitive information? And there's a lot of examples out there where organizations using AI and, for design or building, and in the process, they're, giving away their trade secrets or they're building something. It doesn't end there. There's also ethical use in terms of AI. Are we using it ethically? And then, of course, the big question is, from a risk or compliance perspective, part of your approach we think is very important is safety and correctness. How confident are we? Because, let's be honest, a lot of generative AI tends to be a bit of a black box. We hope we get the right answer out of it. I'm going to give it, back to Dave Cameron. Dave, how do we, adding on to that, how do we stay ahead of these risks?
Yeah, and it's not only regulations, I'd also say industry standards, right? I mean, we all have different industries and their standards to comply with in that. And I've thought about it more from the industry standard perspective, where you can have, it's the data, it's the input you have, right? So what do you say, garbage in, garbage out? You continuously monitor relevant sources. You get timely updates, get recommendations. And as you said, it's challenging because sometimes one false thing could screw up generative AI in the process. So if you've got domain experts who understand on the legal side the regulations and on the industry side understand the various standards, you could start to get a sense for, okay, what's good, what's not good, and monitor the relevant sources as they come in. And then you can make recommendations for compliance adjustments based on that, in my opinion.
Others want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just point out again that Gen AI is probabilistic in nature. And so anything that is public facing, or let's call it auditor facing, is going to be a bit sketchy. I'd want as much of that to be internal facing as possible, and then have some human being reviewing things, because a human being is going to catch the errors, and it can be very difficult to train models to within 95% accuracy. I saw a webinar the other day with Andrew Ng, who's obviously one of the pioneers in this space, and they were all excited about getting models from 80% to 90% and even 95% accuracy. Well, which part of your business can be wrong one time out of 20? And I don't think meeting regulatory requirements should be in that category. That's not a nice to have kind of thing. That is a must have kind of thing. So be very careful about where you implement these and who it faces, because you want to make gosh darn sure that when you're talking about meeting regulatory requirements and making filings and so forth, you must have a human being as a control point in that workflow. But that's not to say you can't help that human being with lots of automated commentary, ideas, and suggestions. I'm pretty sure that a great amount of the value from AI in general will come from suggestions, because these engines are really good at noticing things and pointing things out. You missed this field, you missed that field. These kinds of things are very, very good use cases for AI, reminding humans what they did not do or what else they need to do. But just be very careful pointing that stuff, any Gen AI, at the external world.
Eric, I think you bring up a really good point, which is a dilemma a lot of organizations are struggling with. Obviously, generative AI can be a tremendous boon for a number of organizations. It can, done well, we've all seen areas where it can provide a tremendous competitive advantage. But on the risk and compliance side, some of people are saying this is scary. And by the way, I know some regulators who would say, hey, my regulation is not nice to have. My regulation is a must have.
Right.
In addition to the other areas you're talking about. And we also believe that there's going to be increasing, we've seen this, I'm dating myself, but I'll go back to the dawn of the internet, where companies had to get on the internet because it really moved their stock price. There are going to be a lot of technology professionals listening to this saying, hey, I'm sort of caught here because I'm being pushed to be able to use generative AI. I really need to be able to use it. But on the other hand, I and my, general counsel or chief risk officer are saying, hey, these are some big problems. How does somebody sort of move forward on that? How do we know, how do we balance those risks? Because I don't think it's an option to say, we're just going to wait till we have all the risks figured out. But on the other hand, we don't want to do nothing.
Well, let me throw one quick idea out. I heard on a show recently on DM Radio, someone was talking about how in certain industries, if you have a call center, there are regulations about at how far into the conversation the person on the client side is supposed to say, this call is being recorded, or give some piece of information to the person calling in. Well, AI can monitor all of that stuff and give you very, very accurate assessments of who is doing that properly and who isn't. So all of a sudden you go from a case where you were just trying to sample one in every 50 or 100 calls to make sure people are doing the right thing, to having an engine that is tracking that precisely with natural language processing and some sort of key value store that says, ding, this person didn't do it in time, ding, this person didn't do it in time. So that kind of thing is tremendously powerful, because now you can greatly increase your awareness of who's not doing things properly and who is. But again, it's internally focused to tell management who's doing what. That's a tremendously powerful use case.
Yeah, other people on that? I see a lot of heads nodding.
Yeah, I want to say from the compliance perspective, you have that from different angles. And the big advantage with generative AI is that you can give it various roles. And depending on the role you give it, you can have 5 different angles. If you do that as an individual, your experience goes into one field. So it's much harder to have those various contexts at the same time. And I think that's a big advantage of using generative AI, to get all the information together and having the different viewpoints assembled into one view and suggested to you on where you should focus and what you should be paying attention to. What you typically see, if I'm putting a list down of things to check out of my experience, I'm missing out 3 or 4 things. If I ask it at Claude or ChatGPT, I see they're adding 3 or 4 points which I haven't thought of. And I think that's a major important part as well for compliance.
And David, you were about to add to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I was going to do is go back to what you were saying when you answered your own question, because I'm thinking about the question, and your answer basically just kind of stepped on it and said, if anything, AI is preventing us from being able to stay ahead of regulatory requirements. And I think if what we were to do is fold back what we were chatting about on one of the earlier questions, it's not a question of of the AI, it's a question of how we're using it. So there's 2 other aspects here. One, that is, I'm going to pile on your list, which is a risk of automation bias, which is, people who don't understand how these things work just presume that they're magic oracles that always tell the right answer, and so they just become dependent and reliant on the technology to just do the right thing. And we all know that generative AI sometimes is prone to lie about things because it makes things up, because it is predicting what it thinks it should be doing, not necessarily providing an accurate result. So I think the answer here goes back to, it's founded on data quality, but rather we have to twist that a little bit and call it, trustworthy information management, and introducing AI governance practices before you start to launch your AI program and presume that it's going to be doing everything right. So what that means is understanding where the potential risks are and what are the types of governance tactics that are necessary, and where do you put humans in the loop, and how do you do some degree of assessment of your inputs prior to integrating them into that big pile of content, so that you've got an assessment of the risk of that data source as a component of the ultimate model, and be able to put some controls on that when you start seeing that there's the results are going off the trail.